Welcome back for another episode of the Silver and Blue Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Sanchez. Joining me, as always, is my co host, Corey Douglas. And we have a very special guest today on Roster Cutdown Day. Joining us is Connor Livesay from Blogging with the Boys. How are you doing, Connor?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
it was an interesting day in Cowboys land today. Definitely got some somewhat surprising cuts. I guess nothing terribly surprising, but we did get some interesting moves, and they definitely did some maneuvering with the roster. Before we started recording, Connor, we're kind of discussing different moves that they made, and one of them that jumped out to me was the cutting Carlos Watkins for John Ridgway. Was between that one, or were there any others that surprised you? What did you guys think about initial thoughts about roster cutdowns?
Yeah, I mean that was probably the one that stood out the most. Just I mean, I wouldn't say it was technically surprising, but maybe the one that caught the most attention, just because it was a guy that was here last year. Seemed to be a decent fit in that one technique role, and they kind of went with the younger draft pick in John Ridgway, which that shouldn't shock anybody that the Cowboys preferred their draft pick over a veteran. But I think that if you would have added it up and said who's been more consistent through camp and the preseason, and then who has that veteran experience, you obviously would have picked Carlos Watkins. But I think they're going to give their young guys. It seems like they're doing that in multiple positions. They're going to give the young guys a shot and see if what they did in these last this draft class and the draft class before is going to be able to contribute on this roster in 2023.
Yeah, and I think for me, nothing like you said, nothing really kind of stood out as surprising per se. I was kind of interested to see that they let go of the running back Davis. I thought he had shown enough during preseason to kind of cement his spot on the roster. But I understand, Rico's been here for a couple of years, and they kind of went with what they were familiar with already. But other than that, nothing really caught my eye as like, oh, I was really surprised by this move.
The biggest thing to me was how they appear to be managing the IR and some of their hurt guys. I mean, they kept 8 receivers on the initial roster, obviously one of those being James Washington. Michael Gallup is not, as we already knew, not on the pup list. But yeah, Dennis Houston made the roster. They had several undrafted free agents make the roster. And I saw Rob Phillips posted a very interesting note. He looked into it, and 46 of the current 53 players were either drafted or signed as rookie free agents by the Cowboys. I don't know relatively what that is to other NFL teams and what the numbers are for other teams around the league, but that seems insane. The only guys that were not drafted or signed as rookie free agents by the Cowboys are Terrell Basham, Dante Fowler, James Washington, Anthony Barr, Jaron Curse, Malik Hooker, and Brian Anger. Everybody else on the roster started their career with Dallas. So they clearly there's a lot of jokes on Cowboys Twitter, and Connor, you're one of the many cynics on Cowboys Twitter for sure. They tend to love their guys. they always we like our guys, we like who we have, and that's their team philosophy. And you can argue about it, you can complain about it all you want, but that appears to be their philosophy. It can be frustrating at times, but yeah, they seem to be set with their guys right now.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the 8 wide receiver thing too. I mean, that stood out to me earlier too, because I mean, James Washington's going on, probably I heard a return list after tomorrow more than likely. So are they going to keep 7 wideouts on the 53? That seems a lot, like a lot in my opinion. So I mean, again, like I wouldn't have met. They could have put Michael Gallup on the pup list and not had to worry about a roster spot or any sort of roster maneuver there, but that raises my eyebrows, and people get mad at me on Twitter when I say it, but that almost looks like they're hedging their bets that Michael Gallup might not be ready as soon as they think he is. Because I mean,
Mm.
6 wide receivers is a lot. A lot of teams just carry 5. They're carrying 8 right now. Washington's going to go to IR to make it 7, but I don't know where there's another move there in carrying 7 wide receivers, even though one of those guys is technically a special teams player in Cavante Turpin. That's still a lot of guys to carry at that wide receiver position. So I wonder if they're going deep there for a reason, i.e., Michael Gallup might not be ready week 2, 3 or so, or they're having the CJ Goodwin of the offense where you're carrying Kevontae Turpin. He's taking up a wide receiver roster spot, but he's mainly just going to be used as a specialist.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I looked at that is I kind of felt like they were basically telling us that they're not as confident in some of those guys as they might portray in the media. And I know, Connor, you've been on the front office for a while now, just about different moves they're making and different moves they don't make in free agency and during the offseason and things of that nature. So that's kind of what that told me is that, they're going with a collection, they're going with more instead of, locking down, 5 or 6 that they feel really comfortable in. They're going to try to see what they have in some of these guys and hope for the best is kind of the way I looked at it.
Yeah, and you guys kind of touched on it there, and or Connor mentioned it. One thing that's interesting to me is, what kind of role is Turpin gonna have? Because you did say, maybe he is primarily a specialist, but how much of a role, if at all, on offense do you guys think he's gonna have? Because I mean, they used him some, and I think he could be used in kind of a similar fashion to how they used Kevontae Turpin, or sorry, how they used Kevontae Turpin, used Luck Whitehead, Tavon Austin, those types of guys that they've had in the past. Do you guys see a role for him in the offense, besides returning kicks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something they could do. It'll probably be that more Lucky Whitehead jet sweep guy. Have 3 or 4 plays a game where you got him on the field, and he might be your number one, target in that progression. But I wouldn't expect a huge role for him, just because I mean, realistically, we've seen him do a couple things in preseason and training camp and all that, but I mean, we don't know. It's not like we've seen him do a ton of things as far as receiving goes. So it might be more the jet sweeps, the designed handoffs, the screens here and there, and then maybe he'll get in on the slot and do some things. But I mean, I think he'll have somewhat of a role. But yeah, I would think it would be more of the specialist role, especially this early on with not knowing what we know as far as route running and timing with the quarterback. Because we've heard about Dennis Houston, we've heard how Jalen Tolbert and Dak have a good connection, but it's not like we've gotten that same concept with Kevontae Turpin. We haven't heard any of Dak and Kevontae Turpin are hooking up in practice a lot. It's just been a lot of the specialist stuff, returns, and then a couple plays in the preseason. So I mean, it might be a smaller role, but he might have some sort of hand in those. I call them trick plays, but some of your sweeps and reverses and screens.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think anything that you get from Turpin on offense is gravy. I think his job is kind of what we saw in the Chargers game. He's not going to return, a punt and kick every single game, of course, but I think his impact is going to be about changing that field position for the Cowboys because I think this offense is going to struggle a little bit more than we've seen in previous years. So I think the field position game is where his biggest impact is going to be felt.
Where y'all at just overall on the receiver room? Because I know, everyone hit the panic button when James Washington got hurt. And then we kind of felt better, got a lot better news as the season or as the preseason and training camp wore on, where, it's like, hey, we feel pretty good about Noah Brown. He's having a great camp. Simi Fehoko looks a lot better. Kevontae Turpin came into the fold. Like all these depth guys had really strong camps, but it still gives you some pause. And you've gotten good news on Michael Gallup. So I feel like the panic about the wide receiver room has come down kind of considerably in recent in the last couple of weeks, especially since the Washington injury. How big of a concern are the receivers to you guys? Because it seems like, it seems like Gallup is going to be back sooner than we initially feared. And now, Grant, I know part of the pup list thing is that he'll be able to practice, and so that doesn't necessarily mean he'll be able to play, but he'll be able to ramp up during those first 4 weeks versus having to start his ramp up process in week 5. Where were you guys at on just the receiver room as a whole? With Gallup and all the depth guys who have had pretty decent camps.
You want to start it off?
Yeah, for me, I think receiver is still a pretty big concern. You mentioned a guy like Noah Brown. You mentioned a guy like Simi Fehoko. We just got done talking about Turpin and how his impact's probably going to be minimal on the offense. Jalen Tolbert, he's shown some things in practice, but I think some of the games, against the Chargers, not getting his foot in bounds, some of those across the middle plays where he just, kind of short armed it or whatever, maybe hurt footsteps, things of that nature. I think that's going to be a work in progress for Tolbert. So I definitely think there's a lot of questions to be answered there. And I think it's impossible to get all those answers before, the team steps out there in regular season action.
Yeah, I mean, I got all the, I was probably lower on CeeDee Lamb this offseason than a lot of people just because, then again, like, I think everybody can admit that CeeDee Lamb's a really good football player, but I think everybody should be able to look at it and go, we haven't seen him be the, wide receiver one for this team yet. I mean, the times he's got the opportunity to do it, a few games where Amari Cooper wasn't there and he was the focal point, it didn't end well. I mean, obviously in the Chiefs game, he got hurt at halftime. But before that, he had one catch for 6 yards, I think it was. So there wasn't a whole lot of evidence to give us, hope that CeeDee Lamb was going to overtake this wide receiver one position. There was going to be zero hesitation with it and questions about it. I think he did a really good job this offseason of calming a lot of those questions. But on our podcast with Mark Schofield, we talk about it all the time. He calls it cover one, double CD. And that's just, they're going to play cover one with one safety high and the other safety, or they're going to bracket CeeDee Lamb and going to play cover one and not let you run the ball. They're going to make Jalen Tolbert. They're going to make, who's the third wide receiver those first couple weeks. They're going to double CeeDee Lamb, take him away and go, we don't trust that you're going to be able to run the ball because your offensive line probably isn't going to be as good as it was last year, and you couldn't run the ball last year. Zeke's aging, declining, whatever. You don't want to get Tony Pollard involved, so we're going to put your number one target on the back burner and make Jalen Tolbert and Noah Brown beat me. And, I mean, I think, like you said, I have no confidence in that working. Just because, I mean, again, we've talked about the Denver Broncos finding the blueprint, and I just think that blueprint got a lot easier to start this 2022 season is if you can bracket CeeDee Lamb, if you can put your number one corner on CeeDee Lamb, most every other team in the league is going to take their cornerback 2 and cornerback 3 and feel confident that they can at least make life difficult for Jalen Tolbert and Noah Brown, where in years past, you couldn't really do that because you had CeeDee Lamb on the other side. Your cornerback 2 couldn't match up with him, or you had Amari Cooper on the other side. You had Cole Beasley, whatever it was, somebody in the slot that could do those things, and there's just nobody. I mean, I'm just again, people call me negative and pessimistic, but maybe I'm just not gullible enough to fall into the Noah Brown trap again. I mean, that's been a thing for 5 years now that, breakout season's coming. They call it 85 Hive, and it's like he is what he is. He's a solid 4th or 5th wide receiver that does a good job with the blocking, doing the little things, but there's not a corner in the world that's going to be terrified of Noah Brown. There's not a defensive coordinator in the world that's going to be terrified of Noah Brown. And right now he's your second wide receiver. And I think that's a major issue.
Yeah. I just want to say on the receivers just real quick. You mentioned Amari Cooper. Of course, like I said, I followed you on Twitter and I've seen you going after the front office. Where did you stand on letting Amari Cooper go or trading him for a 5th round pick?
I mean, I didn't like it. I think people thought he got paid too much money, but when you look at the market, and that's what I try to explain to people, is you got guys like Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, all these dudes who are coming up for new deals or contract extensions, whatever it is. I mean, he's like the 18th highest paid receiver, I think, in the NFL. I think I saw that the other day. So Cowboys fans are gullible. There's no other way to get around that. Like, they hear what Jerry and Steven say and they treat it as the gospel. I'm not stupid enough to do that anymore. It's been a long time. Like, I can look at the way the markets, I mean, they did it with Dak for 4 years. They said, yeah, he's just not, we don't know if he's a $40 million a year guy. That's a lot of money. We're not going to make him the highest paid quarterback in the league. They did it. And now he's the 9th highest paid quarterback in the league. Like, it's not hard to kind of look at the way these things work out and go, okay, look, you can pay him now and complain about how much he's making, but in 6 months from now, he'll be way down the list of guys who's getting paid the most money, and the cap continues to grow. there's so many ways to maneuver the cap these days with, transitioning money from signing bonus to bonus. It's not as hard as these teams make it seem to be, as far as getting money available to spend or getting freed up money available to have for cap space. They talk a lot about how, these players set themselves up to make the cap an issue, but the cap is very easily to maneuver. And I think that there's a lot of teams out there that give you evidence that you can make a lot of players the highest paid position, highest paid players at their position, and they still compete. They still sign free agents. They still use the trade market. So I don't know. I think they think our fans are gullible and they want to, we talk about it all the time, but they want to win their way, and they're not going to do anything to change that. But yeah, I think getting rid of Amari Cooper for a 5th round pick was a bad idea, and your team's better with them, and you got a bunch of money sitting here that you're not spending to do anything with. So to me, you made your team worse, and you got a bunch of money and didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, it's really frustrating when you think about it that way. And it's like, I feel like for me, it's less about the Amari Cooper thing and more about, not doing anything with that money. It's like, all right, I can get behind the idea that Cooper wasn't worth the money he was getting, and you structured the contract the way you did for a reason. But like that,
right.
They didn't do anything with the money.
If
So
they would have cut Amari Cooper and Lyle Collins and said, hey, instead of these guys, we want Allen Robinson on a good deal, or we want, we're going to go out and draft our left tackle of the future who might start at left guard in week 1, but we're also going to spend half of what we save from Lyle Collins to bring in just a consistent, sure thing at offensive tackle that, if Terrence Steele isn't the answer, which that's not being talked about enough, I don't think.
I've been saying that
people correlated the Cowboys winning games at the beginning of the year last year to Terrence Steele being this, all pro level right tackle. And he's bad. I mean, that's putting it nicely. Again, I argue with people all the time who I know don't watch the game, like all 22. They just watch, the ESPN broadcast, and they see the final score and go, everything that happened today was either really good or really bad based on what the win or loss record is. But Terrence Steele was not very good last year. They had success not because of Terrence Steele. He was obviously involved. I'm not saying he's a terrible football player, but he didn't play great football last year, and it looks a whole lot similar this year to what he did last year. I think people are just more panicked now. But some people are panicking and going, "This guy, what happened? He's declined." And it's not that he declined; it's just he's your only option now. Where before you always could fall back on Lyle Collins and know what you were getting. Now he's the only option. He's getting beat in training camp. He's getting beat in the preseason, and people are starting to panic. But then there's the other half of the fan base who's still very gullible and just goes, okay, he'll be fine. We won 6 games with him there last year. It's going to be fine. But it might be fine. They might win 6 games with him this year, but that doesn't mean that he's doing his job to the best of the abilities and, he's the answer at right tackle, because I think
he's getting a lot of help too. He's getting a lot of help at the beginning of last year.
I think Kellen Moore is going to have to get really creative with, a lot of 12 personnel to help out, both Tyler Smith and Terrence Steele. And I do think the perception of Steele is really interesting because, everyone was falling all over themselves for him last year when it was like, oh, he's this backup tackle that's stepping in and playing decent and they're winning with him. How's that perception going to be when Lyle Collins and Tyron Smith are both gone now and he's, I guess, your best tackle right now? So how thrilled is everyone going to be with Terrence Steele then? I don't know. Do you think they're going to bring in another tackle? I know there's a lot of talk about it, and maybe they will, but there was the rumor about I'm blanking on his name, but the Jets offensive tackle yesterday. I don't know if I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not. That got shot down, but it sounds like they're trying to get another tackle. He got released today.
Yeah, so I guess if they were interested in trading for him, which I know the guy who put that out seems to swing and miss a whole lot. So he might just be getting information from the agent to stir up interest. But, it's just he got released today. So if they wanted to pursue that, if they were actually actively pursuing him, which I'd talked to some people who said that they had talked to some people that never even happened, that they never even reached out to trade for him. So that seems like it was kind of, I don't know, maybe an agent starting some rumors to, knew his client was probably going to get released and wanted to see if somebody would jump in and trade for him last minute. But, I think they could, claim somebody, if somebody, Alex Leatherwood, if somebody like that falls to him that they maybe like coming out of college, a guy who's going to go through waivers and they fall to him in the waiver priority, maybe they claim a guy, but I just don't think it's going to be anybody that like moves the needle.
I just think that surely they're not going to go into the season with Josh Ball and Matt Waletzko as your backup tackles. And, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but maybe they are. But I did think it was telling that, Ball looked bad. That's putting it nicely, all preseason and all of camp. And it was pretty telling where, between Ball and Waletzko, I was like, okay, the perception was Ball's further along than Waletzko. Waletzko has a really high ceiling. He has all these traits, but he's a project. And I thought it was really telling that in like the limited action Waletzko got in the third preseason game, he already looked a lot better than Ball. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but I thought he looked a lot better than Ball. So, I guess Matt Waletzko is your third best tackle, and I like him a lot, and I think he can be a good player in the future, but I don't think he's remotely ready to be trying to block Shaq Barrett against Tampa Bay if Tyler Smith goes down. So I guess this.
Can we talk about how Tyler Smith supposedly has a high ankle sprain right now too? Was that?
That's another very underrated thing. Is like, okay, so now Tyler Smith has a high ankle sprain. Apparently, it's just, and then you hear Jerry talking about, that we have all these guys, all these issues on our line. It's going to require the skill position guys to step up. And I feel like they're like setting all of this up to have this, like, he's like, we need Dak to step up. And like, good franchises don't just throw BS at the feet of their quarterback and they're just like, save us. Good franchises are like, hey, we're going to help you out.
Go fix this.
Yeah. And it feels like they've just kind of set it up for this narrative of the quarterback contract hamstrung us a little bit. And, and then we're going to go into this offseason and hopefully they have this rollover cap space that they've talked so much about, and they go and get whoever, or no, that they're going to be. I mean, how the hell is Stephen Jones going to handle multiple big contract negotiations at the same time when, this offseason, Diggs and CD are going to want to get paid. So it's just a never ending cycle of cap semantics, I guess, with these guys. And they seem that like the narrative always kind of seems to end up, laying it at the feet of Dak. And, that the Dak narrative is a whole other conversation for another day, but not to get too far into the weeds there. But it just feels like the way they've set up this offensive roster, they're just like, please be Superman Dak. Like this is the biggest Dak needs to be Superman roster they've had since, in Dak's career.
Yeah, so, I mean, was it 2018 they had to trade for Mark when they released Dez?
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, again, CD's better than Allen Hurns and Cole Beasley and those guys, but it's unfortunate. Like I said, we talk about it all the time. People who I think are realistic Cowboys fans and people who write about them and talk about them and blog about them, whatever it is, they go, what's changed over the last 15 years? You've changed all these players. You got rid of Dez. You brought in CD. You bring in Amari. You get rid of Terrence Williams. Whatever. You go from Romo to Dak. You go from Marion to Zeke, and it's all the same stuff. At the end of the day, it's just like they don't know. They don't know how to build a roster to win a Super Bowl. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and it's not only throw BS at Dak's feet, it's also Jerry being in the media over the last few days saying that this offense is going to run through Zeke and that, we're going to run the football more this season. Connor, what have you been thinking when you've been seeing Jerry in the media with that?
I mean, I think he believes it. It's I don't understand it, but I mean, I think he truly believes it. I think he thinks they lost last year because they couldn't run the football. And I mean, again, like, don't get me wrong. Like, if they could run the football, it's going to do nothing but help the offense. But also, if you don't change your offense game plan and philosophy for 9 straight weeks and people know it, what routes are being ran on certain down and distances, you don't really do anything different. Like, that's an issue on the coaching staff. And I mean, obviously the quarterback was hurt, so he couldn't run around, he couldn't move around the pocket, he couldn't move out of the pocket as much. But I think that, I mean, again, it doesn't take again, we go back to the gullible Cowboys fans. Anybody who still think that the offense runs through Zeke, I mean, I got a house in California I'd like to sell you for $2 million because it's don't get me wrong, when Zeke's healthy and the offensive line's good, the running game is effective, and we like that. We're not complaining about the running game working. But if you think you're going to go up against Tampa Bay in week 1 and run the ball 30 times and throw the ball 20 times and you're going to win, I promise you, unless you get a bunch of turnovers and you get a defensive touch, unless that's the case after the second quarter because you're up 21-0 and you stop throwing to run out the clock, that's the only way that running the ball more than passing ever works is when you've done some things, whether you've hit on some big plays early, you've had some special teams touchdowns, and you can start to maybe coast a little bit, hand the ball off, chew clock. But if you think that the winning formula is running the football 70-30, the league has showed you that is not the case by the Buffalo Bills, by the Kansas City Chiefs, by the Los Angeles Rams. Like, the teams who are consistently in the playoffs and battling in the playoffs, they're not running games aren't built through their offensive philosophy isn't built through the running game. It's built through, sure, we'll use the running game at times, but I mean, again, nobody can name the Chiefs running back this year. Nobody can. I mean, it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but again, nobody's drafting him in the first round of the fantasy playoffs. You know, it's they're running the football when they need to, and they're throwing the football to win these football games with their quarterbacks, their passing game. So that's the most disappointing thing this year is I feel like the Cowboys hurt their passing offense, and I think they, butchered their passing defense too as well by botching the Randy Gregory thing. And maybe Micah Parsons plays a ton on the edge to make up for that loss, but I feel like they got worse on passing defense by losing a pass rusher who was, maybe not dynamic, but could really get after the passer, and then losing their offensive lineman who helped pass protect, and then getting rid of the receiver who was really good at catching the football. So,
yeah, there's, that you're starting to get into the defense there, and did want to, get into that a little bit. Obviously there's the concerns about the offense, and you could go on for however long, but yeah, all the talk about Zeke, and Zeke's the straw that stirs the drink, the famous quote during the Zeke contract negotiations a couple years ago. I just, every time I hear the quotes, and I do think they kind of believe it because their moves on the offensive line show it. They're investing in Terrence Steele, who, for all his warts, he's a pretty good run blocker. Tyler Smith is a much better run blocker than he is a pass protector, in my opinion.
Yep.
And so, like, they're investing in the run game here, and I certainly don't trust it, and it makes me want to go make myself a drink every time I see Jerry in the media saying that this team goes through Zeke, because it doesn't. It goes through Dak. This team does not go as Zeke goes. And like, this is kind of a dark way of putting it, but like, if Zeke blew out his knee tomorrow, that changes the Cowboys' season zero. It changes.
Sounds bad, but they probably get better. I mean, truthfully.
Yeah, and like I love Zeke. He's a good running back. People give him a bad rap. Like, I don't dislike Zeke the player. He's a good running back. It's just the contract is bad. And so, like, again, if Zeke got hurt tomorrow, they're at worst, nothing changes. At best, they might be a little bit better because maybe they won't lean on the run game so much. So
I remember when Dak lost his leg in half at New York, people said, "Oh, this is great. They're going to lean on the run, and they'll be more run heavy. They'll lean on the run, and they're not going to lose games." And then they won 5 games that year, 6 games that year.
Yeah,
they had already had 2 at the time, so they went 4.
Also to get those 6 or whatever they ended up winning.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, and it's kind of that time of year where you're either pessimistic or you're sipping the Kool-Aid. I'd like to think I'm somewhere in the middle because, I'm aware of the shortcomings of this roster and, everything going on. But, a couple weeks before week 1, you start sipping the Kool-Aid a little bit. It's exciting. The season's back, and I can't wait to be mad again every Sunday. But, back to talk about the defense a little bit. Connor, you're expressing some concern about the defense. I think if this team's going to be good, it's going to be because of their defense. I think the offense can be okay. I have huge concerns about it, but I do think the offense can be good, or at least good enough. If they're going to be good, it's because of their defense, and I gotta say, I was pretty sick about how the whole Randy Gregory thing played out, but I am pretty darn excited about this defensive front because it seems they're really deep, and they're really talented across the board. I love the safety room too. I have some questions about the cornerback depth, but up front, this seems to be a really deep defensive front, especially when you factor in, how deep they are at linebacker as well now with Anthony Barr and Leighton Vander Esch kind of being like a co-insurance policy for the health of each other.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they'll be fine. I mean, I think we've kind of learned to realize that the defensive regression kind of is always expected after a year. I mean, I remember the Chicago Bears, what was it, 3 years ago? They had like 27, turnovers. Everybody thought they're the best defense in the world. The next year they were terrible, and I don't think this defense is going to be terrible by any means, but I do think that they were number one in DVOA last year, and I think that I'd pick them to be closer to 15 than 1 this year in DVOA, just from that natural regression, losing a pass rusher like Randy Gregory. And then again, like the thing we feel like we gloss over a lot, and maybe this is just the pessimism coming out of me, but outside of, Randy Gregory getting banged up a little bit and Lawrence getting banged up a little bit, this defense just stayed really healthy all year. None of the corners really got banged up. Again, we talk about it, like J-Ron Curse already dealing with, a back injury. If he goes down, sure, Donovan Wilson, fine player. We've seen him a lot. That gets a little bit tougher. If one of those corners go down, we don't know what we're going to do. I mean, Deron Bland's had a really good, offseason, but is he ready to step in and start, year one as a 6th round pick? I don't know. I just think that secondary, you're an injury or two away from maybe not hitting the panic button, but you've taken the cover off the panic button and going, okay, how, because we have zero confidence at Nahshon Wright and Kelvin Joseph right now, right?
No.
Zero.
And that's just what I always go back to is it's just like those corners stayed healthy all year for the most part. I know Diggs had a little bang up at the end of the year where he wasn't totally 100%, but Jordan Lewis stayed healthy. Anthony Brown stayed healthy. The safeties for the most part. J-Ron Curse was a huge addition. He's already dealing with some injuries. So I just think that natural regression. And then, you hate to put this out there, but the thought that, hey, you're probably not going to be as healthy this year as you were last year on defense could have them fall back a little bit. But I do still think they'll be a top half of the league defense. I think Micah Parsons will be, even better than he was last year, which is, saying a ton because he was a top 5 to 7 player last year. I think he's really got a chance to push your Aaron Donalds, TJ Watts for, his impact on the defense. And then you're just hoping that DeMarcus Lawrence, you're hoping that Neville Gallimore, you're hoping that Osa and that some of those guys take that second year jump to maybe keep you in that same conversation that you were in 2021.
Yeah, and like you said with the Bears a couple of years ago, when you get that many takeaways as the Cowboys did last year, it is going to be damn near impossible to replicate that. So, and then you said health, Jordan Lewis is already dealing with a hamstring, and those don't typically go away, especially if you try to come back too soon. I know they said that it's not a real concern for the opener, but, anytime those soft tissue injuries start popping up, it's never a good thing. Just the same thing with Curse and his back. Once back issues come, those don't go away. So I think the defense is going to be the reason why this team is successful if they are successful this year. But I think there's a lot of question marks at the same time, just from just different things, variants, I guess you can basically say.
Yeah. And, to that health point, that was kind of, there were several reasons why, obviously, but that was kind of my biggest thing of why I was, so damn upset when they blew last season's chance and when they lost to San Francisco is you don't get very many chances over the course of a decade or two where you get a roster that was that good, that deep, and that healthy. It's really, really hard to make it to January that healthy. And, they had some dings across the board and stuff, but they were one of the healthier teams left in the NFL, and they benefited from some injury luck last year. So, I agree that they're going to have some defensive regression for sure. They're not going to get whatever it was, 34 takeaways, however many they had last year was some outrageous number. But the one thing that is replicable is, I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but one thing that you can repeat is, pass rush and across all trends, pass rush is the key to generating takeaways and turnovers, and pressure creates good defenses. So, if you think Micah Parsons can be that guy, if you think, if you like this defensive front as much as, a lot of people do, I do think in some respect that they're going to be able to replicate at least some of that and still be a really good defense just based on the back of their defensive front, because, again, pass rush creates chaos and that leads to turnovers. And I don't know. I think they have a chance to be one of the better defensive fronts in the entire NFL. And now one thing they struggled with is run defense at times, and they seem to have gotten better at that. They really like what Quentin Bohanna showed. Where I guess him, Osa, and Neville are kind of your three DTs that are going to be playing mostly on the interior. I know they like Chauncey Golston a lot, who had a really good offseason. He's going to be helping inside a lot. I think we all feel pretty good about their pass rush on the outside. Where are we at on their defensive tackle room, Connor?
I mean, I like them. I think it's kind of trying to think of an example or something to compare it to. But I mean, it's like you don't have a guy that you think's gonna be a All-Pro or Pro Bowler even, but they got 3 or 4 dudes that you trust and you feel like are gonna step in and do a good job. So, I mean, I think that they'll be fine at defensive tackle. I think they'll be fine at, on the edges. I mean, my biggest thing is I mean, DeMarcus Lawrence is probably a top 3 player for me on this football team. I love him, but if he's kind of had the Tyron Smith stuff going on here recently, where he's always missing 4, 5, 6 games a season with some sort of injury. If that happens again, Randy Gregory, was a guy who, sure, he might not have had the sacks that the people who don't watch football, complain about, but he was always the top half of the league in pressure rates. Had a really good year last year as far as pressure rates, quarterback hits, affecting pockets. So I think him not being there can be a little bit of a loss. I mean, I know a lot of people are excited about Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler. I'm not saying I'm not, but it's kind of like the receiver room right now. Like maybe those guys, maybe Noah Brown and Dorrance Armstrong are almost the same thing to me. It's just like, sure, I'd probably take, give Dorrance Armstrong the nod on like which player I think's the better football player right now after, 4 or 5 years of seeing him, but it's still a lot of uncertainty there. And again, people complain about Randy Gregory, how much he wasn't healthy or how much he got suspended, but the guy was on the field. He created chaos. And, I think you're hoping that Micah can take that double duty role of playing linebacker, playing pass rush, and really doing that. It's just, I mean, to me, like Micah's your Dak's 1A and Micah's 1B. If something happens to him, your defense is going to look a whole lot different. So you better keep him in bubble wrap and hope he stays healthy, because he's going to be covering receivers, he's going to be covering tight ends, he's going to be blitzing, he's going to be rushing the passer. I mean, he's going to have as many hats as you can have for a second-year defender. And I mean, I wish that I could guarantee that he'd stay healthy for 10 years, because I think he'd be a Hall of Famer immediately. But it's asking a lot of him, and I hope his body holds up and he stays healthy, because again, we say the season goes as his defense goes. I mean, I think you could take it. The season goes as far as Dak and Micah takes them.
Yeah, and just to stay on Micah real quick, because there has been a lot of talk and discussion around, I want him to play, primarily defensive end, or I don't really want him to play linebacker, whatever the case is. Do you have a preference on that, Connor, as far as Micah playing defensive end or rushing the passer or playing linebacker?
I think he's been trained to say that, which I don't hate, because I think that he says that because of the way he can be used is like, oh, I'm lining up at linebacker, but I can be more effective rushing the passer from this linebacker spot on blitz fronts than I can if I just got my hand in the ground. So I think that's a Dan Quinn thing where he's going, hey, we don't want to line you up solely as a pass rusher, because we think that you blitzing from that Mike position or the outside linebacker position when you're technically lined up as a cover player or as a run defender on that play, we think that can be sometimes more effective because of his quickness and strength and athleticism, rushing over the guards and the centers. So I think that they just feel like they can line him up anywhere up on the field, and he can just be a matchup nightmare because you never know when he's coming, you never know when he's covering, you never know when he's running sideline to sideline. So I think that's what he does better than anybody in the NFL. He can cover, he can play the run, he can rush the passer from anywhere on the field, and I think that's why they kind of want to split it up a little bit and not. I think if he wasn't a good cover player, or maybe he struggled as a run defender at times, they'd say, yeah, he's going to be on the defensive line every time and rush the passer because of how good he is at it. But I think they can line him up in different alignments and different spots and say, hey, we're not going to give offenses an idea where he's going and where he's going to be on these snaps.
Yeah, he's best used as kind of a defensive weapon in
Yeah.
my opinion. Like it's better to not think of him as like, oh, he's a linebacker, he's a defensive end. He's just a defensive weapon that like Dan Quinn can deploy however he sees fit. So I guess along Connor's point earlier, this team's going to go as far as Dak and Mike could take them, and obviously those are two of my favorite guys in the league, and I'm really excited to see them try and be Superman and carry a pretty flawed roster. One more thing before we get out of here, Connor, where do you think they're going to win the NFC East, and how high are you on the Eagles roster? Because they traded for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson today. We've discussed different parts of the Cowboys roster, with the cutdowns today. Eagles have made some pretty splashy moves this offseason. How much do you think Jalen Hurts is going to hold that roster back?
I mean, I think the Eagles roster is, I'm not going to say a lot, but like a decent amount better than the Cowboys roster, like 1 through 53.
Yeah.
I just don't see how anybody can look at the two rosters and think otherwise. I mean, people will say, well, their defense isn't anywhere near as good as ours. And it's just I know if you take 2021 and say that's what we're getting, sure. But expecting that natural regression, seeing what they've added on defense with Hassan Reddick, Nakobe Dean. I mean, they've added a ton of good players. Jordan Davis, I didn't even mention him. Like, they've added a ton of good players on the defense side of the ball. They go and get a offensive weapon in AJ Brown. They made their team better this offseason, where I go back to it and I go, okay, the Cowboys added Anthony Barr. They took away Amari Cooper. They added Tyler Smith. That even if Tyler Smith has a really good rookie season, I think most Cowboys fans will go, we're not sure that that's this massive upgrade over what we had last year, right? I mean, even if he has a good, solid rookie season for into the first round, more of a project offensive line that we thought was probably a year or two away from really making an impact. I mean, I don't know how you guys felt about Connor Williams, but his penalties were frustrating. But I mean, he did a solid job at blocking the guy in front of him when he wasn't committing those penalties.
He's a decent left guard.
Right.
He's not anything special, but he's not as awful as everyone made him out.
Like if you could guarantee me that Tyler Smith was going to be Connor Williams at left guard, I'd give you 2 thumbs up and go, you guys made the right pick, because if he can do that in year one, we're thrilled. But when you look at the additions, the subtractions, and go, who do we feel like? I mean, I don't see as a Cowboys fan how you can say Cowboys have far and away the better quarterback. But if you go position by position, the Eagles have the better offensive line. The defensive lines are relatively close as far as, those two position groups. Cowboys got the better linebackers. The secondary is probably a push. The receivers, I'm going to give the nod to Philadelphia because they have a little bit deeper group. They have A.J. Brown, who's shown to be a true wide receiver one in Tennessee, with Ryan Tannehill, not a bad quarterback, but he's not Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. Like, we feel like he can come over to Philly and still make plays. Your tight end's a push, but I think it's close as far as who do I feel like is going to win the NFC East. But I always say the quarterback matters more than in the division race. In the playoffs, the better team wins, and who wins the divisions, normally the better quarterback. But I just think that this Eagles roster is that much better than the Cowboys roster that I right now today I'll say that I feel like Philly's the better team and has the better chance to win the NFC East. But it's just superhero Dak and superhero Micah might be able to change that.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
No, I was just gonna say I pretty much agree with everything Connor just said. I think I still felt like before the Tyron injury, I still kind of was leaning the Cowboys winning the NFC East, but now without him and just the way you look, or when you look at the rest of the offensive line, it's just there's too many question marks. You look at the receivers, too many question marks. So, like I say, I think the Cowboys are going to be hovering around that 9-8, 8-9 record wise, and I don't think that's going to be enough to win the NFC East.
Yeah, I just think that I still think they're going to win the East just because of how much better Dak is than the other NFC East quarterbacks. But this is going to be this 2022 NFC East is going to be a really interesting case study on the importance of having a good quarterback versus a balanced roster, because the Eagles roster is far more balanced and deeper. But I mean, obviously, Dak is just head and shoulders above the other three. So that'll be an interesting case study. Before we get out of here, Connor, do you have anything you want to you want to plug for us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't write as much as I used to, but I still write some throughout the week at Blogging the Boys. Probably pick up more as the season gets started. Me and Mark Schofield do our Talking the Star podcast every week. So once you're done listening to this, if you want to continue to get some Cowboys coverage, just check that out. I really enjoy doing that podcast with him because he's not a Cowboys fan. He has no ties to the Cowboys. He's a Patriots fan, covers the NFL as a whole for NFL Wire. So he kind of looks at everything through an unbiased lens, not an optimistic lens, not a pessimistic lens. He just sees it and talks about it, which I appreciate. So we have a lot of the same thoughts on this team, and that's pretty much it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Connor NFL Draft. I talk probably more than writing and everything. I mean, a lot of my discourse happens on there. So if you want to talk football and other things, whatever it is, you can follow me on there. We can talk about it on there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Connor. We had a great time talking Cowboys with you. We'll definitely be bugging you to have you back on. This was a really good time. Really excited for college football this weekend, NFL the next weekend. It's a fun time of year. Definitely ready for football to come back. Make sure to check out everything that's going on at the Dallas Sports Fanatic. Make sure to check out our Mavs podcast, the Victory Avenue podcast. Subscribe on Twitter. This is our first YouTube video where we're going to start posting these on YouTube as well. So make sure to subscribe to the Dallas Sports Fanatic YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at DAL Cowboys Fanatic, and then follow us on Twitter at Cowboys News 365 and at Dallas_Fanatic. So again, thank you guys for listening. We will talk to you next time on the Silver and Blue podcast.